Hello, and welcome to the Hopkinton Public Library's first adult Take and Make. If you signed up for our Take and Make in our event calendar, you will be able to pick up materials for the Take and Make this week. We will contact you to confirm your pickup time. If you were not able to sign up on an event calendar, you can still participate by picking up a few basic materials at your local craft store. We will be having more Take and Makes for adults in the future, so be sure to check our calendar for more events. We've linked to our calendar in the description. This month, we'll be making a mini snowflake cross-stitch decoration. This makes a great ornament, wall hanging, or desk decoration. Let's take a look at our materials. First, we have some Aida fabric. This is a woven cotton fabric, and you'll notice if you look closely that it's woven as a grid with a bunch of holes in it. This fabric is made specially for cross-stitch. I've marked my fabric front and back to help you follow along, but you don't need to do this. We also have an embroidery needle, which is currently stuck in the fabric to keep it safe. You will notice that this needle is blunter than a normal sewing needle. This is because, unlike most sewing, where you make a hole in the fabric by pushing the needle through it, here we will be pushing the needle through the pre-made holes in the Aida fabric. I do still suggest keeping this needle away from small children, though. We have a sheet of paper. This is our cheat sheet. This grid of black and white squares tells us where to embroider. Each square on the grid corresponds to the boxes created by the pattern of holes in the fabric. Each hole will be the corner of a small X. Cross-stitch is basically thread-based pixel art. We will be stitching in the boxes that are marked by black squares and skipping the boxes marked by white squares. In more complicated patterns with multiple colors, each color will be marked on the grid with a different symbol, like this. Next, we have a bit of embroidery thread. This floss is made of 6 double-ply threads. What that means is, if you tease the end a bit, you'll notice that each strand is actually made of 6 strands, and each of those strands in turn is made of 2 even tinier strands. We're going to be working with the middle-sized strands today, so we're going to take a moment to prepare our threads. First, we'll cut each of these long threads in half to make them a more manageable length. Then, we'll separate each of our big strands into 6 2-ply strands. Last, but not least, we have a wooden embroidery hoop. This will serve as the frame when we are done. Some people like to use an embroidery hoop to hold their fabric while they work, but this embroidery hoop is quite small, and it will get in the way if we do that. So we'll set this aside and work on our fabric while holding it. Okay, with that out of the way, it's time to get started. The first step is to thread the needle. Take one of your strands of thread that you separated out earlier. Now, we're going to double it up so that when we work with it, we'll have 2 strands in each stitch. You can thread from the cut end or the joined end. But once the needle is threaded, you want 2 short tails and 1 long looped tail. Now we're going to prepare our fabric. Usually, you start cross-stitch patterns from the upper left-hand corner. This means that we need to plot out our pattern before we start. We want our snowflake to be centered when we're done, and we definitely don't want to start off-kilter and run off the edge of the fabric. There are a few ways to do this, but I want to instill good habits in you. One of the most accurate ways is to find the center of your fabric and then count out from there to find where your first stitch will be. You will notice that the pattern has helpfully numbered the grid for you. Keep in mind that since you're counting from the center of your fabric, you'll also want to count from the center of your pattern. So I'll count up 13 stitches and left 7 to get to the uppermost stitch. So this is where we'll be starting. I'll mark the hole with my needle, then flip my fabric over. The first stitch comes in from the back of the fabric. I'm going to mark the hole with my finger, remove the needle, and then bring my needle in from the back. Now I'm going to go to the front of my fabric and go front to back in the hole diagonal up and right of the hole I came out of. So now we have a forward slash. We're not quite done though. I have to flip my fabric over again and put my needle through the loop tail. This ties off my starting end. Now I can pull it until it's taut. You don't want to pull it too tight or it will bunch up the fabric and pull the holes really wide. Instead, you want just a light tug. This is the first half of your stitch. You'll remember from earlier that cross stitch is made up of X's, but first we have to make a bunch of slashes. If you look at our pattern, you'll notice that our first stitch is right next to another stitch. We can save some time and thread by doing rows of stitches together, instead of completing each stitch before moving on to the next stitch. To do this, we'll bring our needle forward through the hole below the one that we just went down through. Then we'll go upright diagonal again and down there. Now we have 2 forward slashes. To turn these forward slashes into full cross stitches, we need to work backwards now. So I'll go up through the hole just below the one that I just went down, and now I'll go diagonal left to cross over that most recent stitch. Then I can do the same thing again to finish off my initial stitch. You will notice, however, that this pattern has a number of gaps in it. It's not just full rows. In order to make this a little easier, you can leave blank spaces between stitches in order to be able to do longer rows. Take the next row, for example. I'll start the row with 3 slashes, but then there's a blank space and 3 more stitches after it. I can skip that space, do the next 3 forward slashes, and then work my way back again. When I get to the space while going backwards, I'll skip it again. So then I will have 3 stitches with a space between them. Generally, you don't want to skip any more than 3 spaces this way. Now, let's say that I'm at the end of a section, or I'm starting to run out of thread on my needle. I need to tie off so that I can start a new section of embroidery, or so that I can add a new thread. To do this, I will make sure that I am at the end of a full row of cross stitches. Then I will flip to the back. Now you can see, as you create crosses on the front, you create bars and crosses on the back too. In order to tie off my thread, I will push my needle under the bars and crosses from the row that I've just finished and pull it through. Then I will clip my thread close. That keeps my most recent stitches from unraveling. Now I can add a new thread to my needle and start a new section, or pick up where I left off with a fresh thread. You will finish the rest of your cross stitch working like this, in rows down the pattern, kind of like a typewriter. You will likely do multiple columns of work where there are large spaces in the middle of the pattern. At the end, you'll end up with something like this. Now the last part, putting it in the embroidery hoop. There are a few ways of finishing off a piece of embroidery, and this is the simplest, easiest, and cheapest way to do it. This is definitely the fast and easy method, so if you make something really fancy later, I do suggest taking it in to be framed professionally. But this is our first work, and we're going to do the cross-stitch equivalent of popping it up on the fridge with a magnet. First, I'm going to unscrew the top to loosen the outer hoop. Next, I'm going to lay the inner hoop down, and then center my finished piece on it. I'm going to take the outer hoop and carefully push it down over the fabric and the inner hoop so that it slips over. Make sure it's centered, and then tighten the screw just a bit. Then I'll flip my hoop over, pull on the fabric a bit to make sure it's pretty taut, and then I'll tighten it a bit more. That looks okay, but it would look really nice if we could get rid of the extra fabric around the edge. Again, there are a few ways you can do this bit, but we're going to do the quick and easy way. I'm going to take a pair of scissors or a sharp blade and cut the fabric right along the edge of the frame. Then I'm going to take some glue or Mod Podge and, using a paintbrush, shove the glue right in that gap there. I'll leave it to dry overnight, and in the morning it will be ready to hang or display. That's it for today. We hope you enjoyed our first adult take and make. Next month, we'll be making Valentine's Day heart and hand warmers, so don't forget to sign up on our calendar. Links to our social media feeds are in the description. Don't forget to like and follow us for more fun crafts, as well as book suggestions, community news, and more. We have also linked to the website where we got our cute snowflake pattern. And last but not least, you can also use the link to our calendar to find our next take and make, as well as lots of other fun events for adults, teens, and kids. Thank you for joining us.